Thank you for coming along. Welcome to the Self-Improvement Show. We've got Caro who's joining us, and so we're going to be talking a little bit about the changes that you've made to yourself, things that you've been through, personal development that you've experienced.
Yes.
So to start off with, I understand that you've come from a long sort of way to get to where you're at today in terms of who you are as a person. And that you've been through a number of things that have at times been hard, but you've sort of arrived at the end and come through it all. So I'm interested in understanding a little bit about some of those changes. So if you want to perhaps tell me a little bit about some of the major changes that you feel that you've made in your life over the years.
Yeah, well, okay, I don't feel this is the end to start with. So I think it's a continuous improvement journey. But yeah, I got in a really far way of where I was. Mm-hmm. I used to be a very, very negative person, not willing to live, I could say, or negative thoughts, toxic, and somehow during my processes, I managed to adopt a growth mindset, positive mindset, and now I see things in a different way. And that's been the key for me from being dark and negative and not knowing what to do with life, or not even enjoying feeling alone even when I was surrounded, to, I don't know, to where I am, that I can say I'm happy and satisfied. Of course, I have a lot of things, but I'm happy and satisfied where I am now, especially with my positive and growth mindset that I didn't have before, I would say.
Yeah. So I'd love to understand that part, because that's really fascinating. Tell me a little bit about sort of, maybe start with a negative mindset that you had.
Okay.
That's something that I'd love to actually even understand, how does it function, or and also perhaps, you know, where it came from. But first and foremost, like, what is a negative perspective or mindset that you used to have?
Well, for me, when I look back now, I wasn't able to say I am happy, or anyone would ask me, how are you? And I would be, well, or sad or bad or good, but it was never possible for me to say I'm good. That was one thing. The other thing is everything were obstacles. I was thinking I was failing all the time because I was very perfectionist, or always trying to get a very high perfectionist standard. So I was failing continuously, or that was my thought, I guess. I felt alone, even though I have a lot of friends around me. I didn't feel people understood me because I was going through a lot of different challenges in my life, and people didn't even believe me or didn't know how to support me when I was a teenager. So it was quite hard. And I think that's when I started being, don't get me wrong, I was very outgoing. I'm extrovert, outgoing with my friends, and I'm good at school. So all of that was going good. It was more an inside aspect that most of people couldn't even see, only me, right? But it was how difficult was everything for me. Everything was a challenge and a negative step, or I couldn't see beyond the trees, I guess that's the same.
So it sounds like it wasn't only like a negative perspective that you had, but actually you were struggling with a lot. So you were actually weighed down with a lot of things in your life.
Yeah.
And that's what made you sort of respond negatively to questions or feel like everything was so hard. So that's interesting, because it's not only a negative mindset, but you had a lot of things that you were struggling with. Yeah,
that's right. But at the time I didn't know, right? When you are a teenager and you just think you're another teenager with your own problems or emotional changes and moods and everything like that. Yeah. And it was quite dark, to the point that I tried to commit suicide when I was 17.
Right.
And I was surrounded friends, I had a boyfriend, but yet I don't know, I couldn't see how to get out of it. I was tired and sad and struggling with what I was doing here, I guess.
Right. So it was so overwhelming that it felt to you like the only sort of solution or way to deal with this was to actually end your life. That's how bad you were feeling inside.
Yeah, I was feeling that nothing made sense. And at that time I was writing a lot, and all of my writing and poems and things, they are all so dark and negative. When I read them years ago, and I didn't recognize that me or that part of me there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a desperation, total desperation for not understanding and not knowing what my place was or my life, or I would say it didn't have a meaning, I guess.
Right.
And it got to a point that I just wanted to rest. It wasn't that obviously I wanted to not continue living, but it was more to have peace and calmness, and I couldn't see any other way that putting myself to sleep, I guess.
Right.
And that's what I tried, to
Right.
just go in calmly and not having to fight more. Or
So it's like there was like so much inner turmoil, and your inner world was actually so uncomfortable and difficult that it was a way to have respite from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that it really sort of shows how difficult things were, because you got to that place because it felt like the only solution. Do you feel comfortable to say a little bit about what got you to such a place where you were feeling so much turmoil inside you?
Yes, I think it was a combination of things, I would say. I'm trying to go back now to that time to see how. I think it was a combination, but pretty much what happened during those years is I had some child abuse, when I was growing up.
Right.
Inappropriate touching. I got very confused.
Right.
And I didn't even realize what had happened to me up until I was 15, 16.
Right.
Because up until that point, I just didn't know what was it or not. I was just a kid, and the moment I realized, as my young adult or adolescent me, my mind, I crumbled. It was, I didn't know what to think, what to say, who I was. I felt guilty. I felt dirty. I couldn't fit together. And at that time, you're starting, in my case, going out with boys, and you don't know how to do that. But then if you have all of this confusion around it, everything was like a big, I wasn't comfortable in my own body. Although in the outside, it looked like I was, but internally I wasn't. I was having panic attacks.
Right.
And everybody thought I was seeking attention. When I went out to ask my friends or my adults around me, nobody believed me. Or if they did, they told me, but it's nothing. And I got even, my self-confidence got a bit, not a bit distracted, because I suddenly didn't trust in myself anymore. I didn't know whether what I was thinking and feeling was the right thing or what everybody else was telling me. So, I don't know. I really didn't like myself, unfortunately, at that time. Yeah. It's hard for me now to connect with that me. Yeah. Because I don't feel it anymore. Yeah.
Which speaks to how far you've come and the amount of change that you've made in your life. But back then, this was a time when things were really hard. And so you mentioned that there was that inappropriate touch from someone close to you, or someone...
someone close in the family.
Someone in the family, right? Yeah. Okay. And so then your adolescent mind was struggling to sort of make sense of that and understand it. And it led you to sort of feel dirty and it's like there was something wrong with you, and all of those sorts of things like that. And then just that weight of that event made you sort of feel like every day was a struggle.
I think that is where my struggles started, or where I started being conscious about what was happening around my 16 or 17. Yeah. And it got worse when I started going out with boys, because it's when I realized I couldn't have a normal kiss or a normal something without going into panic attack or blockages and it was all the normal things that you do when you are a teenager, or even with your friends. I was criticized a lot. So I don't know. It just felt overwhelming and big. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's how trauma works, right? Where it's like there was a particular situation, you were made to feel a particular way.
Yeah.
And then when you're in a sort of comparable situation, but it's very different, but someone sort of kind of behaves in a similar way to you, you get that kind of old reaction, or the reaction that was, from the trauma.
Yeah.
So, something like a kiss, to most people, it's a moment of lightness and discovery and closeness. But because a kiss had meant something very different to you, in a moment when a boy at 16 goes to kiss you, you have that sort of trauma response. And probably the other person would struggle to understand, and kind of, because for them it would be almost unusual that this girl they're trying to have a kiss with is reacting so strongly.
Yeah, that's been really haunting me my entire life, to be fair.
Yeah.
Because then as you develop and grow up, and any intimate relationship has always been really, really hard for me in that sense, to see what things are natural and what are the good things, and to really trust a man, even though in the surface I do trust and I fall in love and everything, but there is some resistance in me to really be comfortable, or to, in the past, to be really comfortable in a relationship, making it quite hard. And as you said, yes, of course, the other person wouldn't understand, or when they did and they tried, it really changed everything, because people try to protect you, and in order to protect you, they change their behaviors or who they are. And when we change who we are, then things don't work. I think that's my...
Yeah. And as I'm sort of thinking about this situation, I can also imagine that it must be really hard when you've had that trauma to be able to differentiate what is the trauma response from what is actually also a natural response of something that's not right. So let's just say, for example, you're being kissed by a boy that you didn't want to be kissed by, to realize that your body is sort of saying no, but to separate that from the trauma when you do want to kiss a boy and you still got that sort of reaction, which is like, oh no. And so it must be really hard with that trauma to separate it from your kind of current feelings that are linked to the actual moment that you're in.
I think when I was a teenager, I didn't even realize, and relationships weren't that deep. So that wasn't, it was more my internal problem. I think it got worse as I grew up and I have an adult relationship, in which case, when I started realizing how my patterns that for me were normal or natural, even though they were painful, for what it was the consequences for the other person, either someone thinking he's approaching me and I'm going to feel hurt or like that. And it really makes things very difficult. And then I started feeling guilty because I couldn't do it or have a normal, but that was my best. I didn't know any other time. And actually, I couldn't control it. At some point was a real diagnosed PTSD.
Yeah, PTSD.
Which I couldn't control any of those responses, how my body would shut down or get really paralyzed or start crying, and I couldn't control it. So it was, quite difficult, I would say.
Yeah. And as I'm kind of listening to this and imagining and trying to understand it, I can really see how, on the one hand, it's like if someone knows about that trauma and has an empathy and almost like more of a exploring what's happened to you, then it can make so much sense, your reactions. Whereas you can also imagine that, you're a 16-year-old boy and you like this girl, and all of a sudden there's this drama, there's just reactions and all of that. And it must be kind of difficult for that person to make sense of it, because they don't really understand what trauma is. Even if you were to try to explain it to them, they might not understand.
Well, to be fair, at that time, I didn't even know what trauma was. And I didn't treat it as trauma. Yeah. So I only started having help or support after my attempt of suicide, that I started having therapy. Right. And it's when I started unpacking what happened to me and maybe starting briefly to understand it. Yeah. But I don't think I started talking about trauma itself or treating it as such up until maybe, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where, longer in the story of my therapy and things, I started really trying to work on the trauma more than anything else. Yeah. And I did different type of therapies and support to try to release it. And I push a lot get better in that sense, because one of the things I really wanted was to have a healthy relationship, and I realized that with that it was going to be impossible.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, and it's been my experience as well that, you know, it can take someone years and years to realize they had trauma.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because for a long time, it's just, I feel a certain way and I react, and that's normal. Like, we don't make that link with something that might have happened years and years ago. And so even that moment of being able to actually go, this reaction is because of this event that happened 10 years ago, that's a huge step forward in that process of sort of self-improvement or working on yourself, just that alone. So it took you a long time to be able to identify those reactions and link it to that trauma.
Actually, it took me really long, because after all of these, when I was 20, I developed a eating disorder, a really bad. I started with anorexia and then bulimia for 12 years.
Right.
So then, like, that trauma, whatever happened to me, went to a secondary place, because everybody started looking and treating the actual eating disorder or what was happening. And it kind of got hidden or somewhere. And everyone, even the doctors, everyone was treating the point of the iceberg, which was the eating disorder symptoms, which were quite heavy at some point.
Right. And so that's interesting, because from the trauma came the eating disorder. Do you want to just even explain that link? Because that's interesting, of how trauma can lead to an eating disorder. Do you have sort of an awareness or understanding of how the trauma kind of created or led to that eating disorder?
I understand it now.
Yeah.
At that time, I didn't, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
What I know, how it started in reality, it was not... One summer you are on holidays, you put some kilos on, and then you come back and think, oh, I want to lose weight.
Yeah.
And then I didn't. And then some comments from friends, oh, you're putting weight on. And then you think, oh, maybe I need to. And you start like anyone else, cutting on bread and doing blah. And then I started having actual stomach problems. I had a hiatus hernia. So I started vomiting my body because of my hiatus hernia. But because of all of these, after 2 months, I had lost, 7 kilos. And then I got in that, okay, I can eat, but I continue doing that. And it went completely out of control.
Right.
And that's how I actually landed in the eating disorder. But now that I know and understand, it was more, I never wanted a curvy body or a body that men would find attractive. That was the underlying. Right. So I really wanted to be a stick, pretty much slim, and not being physically attracted to men in that sense. Right. So that would keep me protected.
Right. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of reflect this, because this is me trying to understand it. Yeah. So at the time, it was driven by a desire to lose weight after you'd felt like you'd put on a little bit too much weight.
Yeah.
And that sort of created this sort of unhealthy pattern of eating that happened. So it was sort of purging and eating, or was it restricting your eating? Or
at the beginning, it was just purging.
Just purging. Okay.
Yeah, and it got really, really bad, to a point that even when I was eating an apple, my worst, maybe years to years, it was anything I was eating, I was purging. Right. Even an apple, everything. That was when it got really bad.
Right.
I can say I would have purged, 10 times a day, or
right.
So everything.
Yeah.
But at some point, it was also my escape way, right. Because in the back of all of these, I was studying my law degree, and then I got a job, and then I was kind of surviving and going through everything, and my eating disorder was my escape, or was what it allowed me, because it also, it numbs you when you are in a process like that, or at least in my case.
Yeah. When
I was eating or purging, I would be numbed. So I wouldn't feel all the sadness or the trauma or anything that at that time I couldn't actually, my body couldn't handle, my body or my mind. So those were, but at some point, what I'm trying to say, at some point, I don't have the word for it now, maybe you help me, when it was really a very adaptive eating disorder, in the sense that I was able to do my life at some point. kind of normal to an extent, but it was still destroying inside me, and it's a very autodestructive.
Yeah. And I can see that as well, that if like throughout the day you're feeling sort of really strong negative emotions like sadness or grief or anxiety, all of those types of feelings, then in a moment of like binge eating or eating a lot, you kind of are distracted, or you don't feel those emotions in that moment. And likewise, when you're purging, you don't feel those emotions.
Yeah.
So it's a way of sort of numbing yourself. And for someone else, it might have been gambling, or it might have been drugs or so on, but you were using food and the purging of food as your way to sort of escape from your feelings. That makes sense. And so there was also this piece which you didn't realize at the time, but it was this sort of way of trying to make yourself almost like unattractive to men as a way to try to protect yourself against kind of relationships that didn't feel comfortable or interests that didn't feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. And that was the part that was linked to the trauma.
Yeah, I got to know that afterwards, later in the process. At that time, I wasn't linking anything, and I was having relationships. So I had 3 long relationships, as healthy as they could be at that time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was it. It got me. It took me quite long to realize. I don't know. I would say it took me long to want it to change, because from the very beginning, I was very lucky. I had the support, in the sense that my parents straight away sent me to therapy, and then even through my life, I've been in therapy trying. I've never hidden anything, but I wasn't really sincere with myself, I guess, because I was doing all these therapies, but still there was something in me that really didn't want to change. Or as they say in the eating disorder, I was getting secondary gains, so I didn't want to give it up.
Right, and those secondary gains is what we talked about the pushing
not
men away.
Feeling or
numbing.
It was in a day-to-day, it was more the not feeling, or because I had stressful jobs, I could thrive at my job, but then I would go home, and at some point it was only during the nights, right? During my day, I was thriving, doing my normal job and everything. Nobody would notice it, but then I was distracting myself when I was getting home, every day, up until I got to a point that, because my relationship at that time was failing again, also because my partner at the time, he knew about my eating disorder, so it was also very difficult. And I decided that I also had almost a stomach. What's the word? When the stomach is about to burst, or because of the vomits, at some point my stomach got really, really weak.
Right.
So I had a health warning, crazy, plus the relationship not working. So I decided to check into a special facility and go ask for sick leave at work and put myself into a facility for, I think it was in total 8 months, to really treat the bulimia. Right. At that time, it was restriction, and it was more restriction during the day, and then the actual eating purging in the night. Right.
Okay. And that's interesting, because you were talking about, and I was going to sort of ask about that, the impacts or the effects of that eating disorder. Say if you could just sort of explain a little bit perhaps on kind of the negative effect of that eating disorder. Did it affect your relationship? It affected your physical body and created health problems. What about even psychologically? And how did what were the consequences of having that disorder?
Well, considering it was 13 years, a lot of consequences, a lot of relationships, because I'm not proud of this, but when you are in an eating disorder, you are not yourself.
Right.
And I would get food from anywhere. That means stealing from friends' houses, food just to get food. And obviously, at some point, that cost me friends or people who couldn't understand it. As well, in my family, I was still living at home. So it cost me have to leave my house to go somewhere else because my parents couldn't take it because I had younger siblings.
So it's the stealing of food that was creating these
Well,
problems?
no, it was more it was the thing that at home I wasn't stealing. It was the food in the kitchen, but I would be eating anything and everything that my mom would have had planned for the week or for my brothers or for whoever, right? And also the late nights vomiting or my parents really worried about me, what I was doing or not doing or with my body. And so it causes a stress in everywhere. But I would also say that when there is someone with an eating disorder, it's also very easy to put everything on the person in the sense that you become the problem of the family, of the relationship, and everybody either wants to save you or to cure you, or it's easier to focus on you than on their own problems. And suddenly you are the center, which at some point maybe is what you unconsciously are seeking, but in the wrong way. And it's very unhealthy and kind of toxic for anything. And also at some point I didn't want to go out because I would prefer staying home with my food. And I isolated myself a little bit. Then also my friends worrying and fights because they would try to prevent it or not allowing me to go to the toilet, and then I would go into fights with them. And all people with good intentions to help me, but when you are there, you don't see that.
And did the people around know that it was linked to the trauma, or were they unaware?
No.
They were unaware, right?
I think some people knew about, but nobody treated it as trauma. Rowan, everybody told me, you get over it.
It was seen as just an eating disorder, nothing more.
Yeah. And it's only when a certain point with a therapist that he started linking it or saying, no, this is happening because. Or one of the reasons, it wasn't the only one. Because then I grew up in a very strict environment, or environment where my parents thrive to succeed and to excel. And sometimes without noticing, we were set up to fail in the sense that it wasn't good enough. And that was really hard as well. In an eating disorder, you want to be perfect and everything needs to be perfect. And when you don't achieve that, then you get the stress, the anxiety, and then it's the cycle. So it wasn't only the abuse, it was a combination of things. But it was only till late that one of the therapists linked it. And I started kind of working on that.
Interesting.
But I have to tell you, I think I only really, really embodied it maybe last year.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
For so long, that link was not so kind of clear to you, or?
Well, it was clear, but what it meant to me to accept it, it had a lot of consequences on my feeling on the person, on my family, on the people who didn't believe me. So I always have tried to protect the people around me somehow unconsciously, and that meant if I'm protecting someone else, then I'm blaming myself. So for years and years, I was blaming myself for saying it, or for sharing it, or for not having stopped it, or for whatever thing that now I understand that I couldn't. I was a child, and a lot of other reasons. And even when I was a teenager and people didn't believe me, what else could I have done, right? But for me, you always go to what's wrong with me, or what have I done, or what could I have done differently or better. Or
And it sounds like blaming yourself, but also by protecting them, you're sort of denying that awareness and that connection between different things. And so part of that sort of protecting them was by just not really wanting to admit the link between the trauma and the eating disorder. That's a really interesting thing around this sort of idea of, like, on the one hand, it was within your family that the trauma had occurred, but that you were equally grappling with the sort of desire to protect them. Is that something, and if there's any of these areas that you don't feel sort of comfortable to talk about, then, do let me know. But I'd love to, if you feel okay, to ask a little bit about that tension between, on the one hand, there were people that hurt you, and the other hand, you wanted to protect them. I'm fascinated about that sort of grapple. That
well, I don't know if I would call it fascinating, but it was a struggle. Actually, sometimes it still is to love people that has hurt you.
Yeah.
In any sense, not only because for me now as an adult, I think in any type of trauma in a family like that, it's both the person who did it, but also the adults who didn't realize it was happening, or the adults who didn't help or I don't know, support for whatever reason, I guess. But it's at the end, you as a child or teenager or whatever, you are relying on your family's love and family's approval and family's acceptance. And when something like that happens, you need that love, but at the same time, you hate the situation or what's happening, and it's a dichotomy. And I was very, I don't know how you call it in psychology, but at some point I was very divided. I didn't have an personality disorder or anything, but I could feel many parts of me pulling in different directions. And that was the really, really hard part that I had to learn in therapy, to talk to all the different parts, because some of my behaviors were going towards benefiting or protecting one part of me, but then the other part would be shouting like, what are you doing? So I think that was the most difficult part of me. And at the end, I always went to, it's me, it's something wrong with me, that why I am processing things like this, or why I'm not feeling better. I always went into, wow, this is nothing happened to you, because that's what I was told. So it was, quite difficult.
Yeah. And I can see, like listening to you, that it's your family that's your source of love, affection, that you aspire to please and to impress, that you, even at a practical level, they provide you sort of care and security and support. And so to kind of, on the one hand, they've caused you this harm, either the person or people that did that to you, or the ones that kind of didn't protect you or ignored it or didn't believe you. And so there's those people that had that effect on you, but equally you kind of felt like you needed them. And so you're constantly sort of walking this tightrope between wanting to address the people who hurt you and confront it and deal with it and do all the things that you would probably want to do if anyone hurt you, but on the same time not want to lose them.
Yeah, it's a very tiring internal fight, continuous internal fight. Because on one hand, as you said, you love them, and on the other hand, you don't. And I think I was never able to be angry with them, because what that would have meant, I was more and I turned that into sadness or into towards me, hence the eating disorder and other things, just because I wasn't able to, because of the consequences if I had been angry or letting my anger out. I didn't even know if I could feel anger, to be honest, because I was sad all the time, or depressed or sad. That's what I did. Yeah,
if you'd become angry at them and sort of, it's almost like the finger had to point either to them or to you.
Yeah.
And by pointing it to you, it was more sadness. It would have been anger if you pointed it to them. Yeah. If you point it to you, you keep their love.
Yes.
If you point it to them, you lose their love. And so that's a really hard.
Yeah. But that fills you with guilt, which is a very powerful and negative emotion. Guilt or blame or all the burdens, and it's
by pointing the
very
finger
heavy,
to yourself.
Pointing the finger to yourself.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what I actually recently told someone, is how light I feel compared to how heavy everything was for me in the past, all the burdens that I was carrying within me.
Yeah.
So the process, I guess, is to get to a lighter, more positive, or acceptance, or I don't know, or finding a meaning.
Yeah. And that's something that I want to kind of explore is how you came out of that. just before we get there, if that's okay, I just wanted to touch on another part, which I'm sort of, and I suppose a lot of people in positions where there's been a lot of hurt from their family would be facing this sort of dilemma that you were in. And I'm interested in asking you whether you feel like you're happy with your choice of having kind of, well, not happy with your choice, but I suppose some people in that situation might have kind of rejected their family and kind of gone, you've hurt me too much, you've caused me too much pain, I kind of don't want to be around you. And they would have, I suppose, in some form or another cut off from their family. Mm-hmm. But that's not what happened for you. And I'm just interested in how you felt or whether you thought about that sort of the cutting off path or approach and what made you sort of not take that.
Because I needed them. So right. I think it's a personal trait. I need more than other things to belong.
Right.
And not having them or not being part of the family was a big struggle for me.
Right.
Also, I would say I had a terrible relationship. So it's not that I was there happy or anything. And kind of there were some years that I cut off the relationship in the sense that I wasn't as much in contact. Mm-hmm. But I never fully cut it off as I'm not going to see my family or do anything. No, there was always, because unfortunately the trauma, what made me, I always needed their approval. Somehow I was always going to search. And also, I didn't trust myself, my decisions. I was always going outside to seek for approval or for their acceptance. It was pretty much me wanting to be loved and to be accepted.
Right.
And that's what I think kept me there.
Yeah.
And also my personality. I'm quite, a giver as well. And I look after the people I love. And cutting off for me wasn't an option because I was going to feel, I thought I would have felt more guilt if I'm hurting someone. And in my brain, cutting off would have meant hurting the people who theoretically love me, which they did in their own way. But so, I think everyone is different. A lot of my friends, the ones who knew, they didn't understand why I was still there or why I was still talking to them or why. But it felt the right thing. And I think I've also, someone told me that I may have a lot of compassion. I can be quite compassionate. And I think that translated into my family as well.
Yeah.
But primarily my need of belonging and my fear of losing them, being alone or feeling guilty because I was hurting them.
Yeah.
More than anything.
It's interesting, like it's almost like a pros and cons, right? And that for someone else, they might balance that in a different way. Yeah. And they may sort of not have as much of a need for their family or be more able to sort of deal with life without them or find another place to belong. So they might be able to go, you know what, I don't want to be around you. But for someone else, that balance in that equation kind of leads to a different result. And so for you, your approach was to try to keep your connection with the family at the cost of sometimes taking on...
Yeah, but having said that, look where I am. I live in Australia, right? My family is in Spain.
Yeah.
So I don't think I could have gone any further. And now I'm in good terms, but I first went to London and I lived there 9 years.
Yeah.
So my way was distance between.
Yeah.
And then everything improved. And then when I was living abroad, overseas, it was easier to not have as close contact, right? Because you are not there. So I think that was my final way. And actually when I started, my real personal development started when I moved overseas to London, because I have to face myself in different environment, everything starting from scratch, and facing myself and not having anyone to tell me what was right, what was wrong. It was just me making choices and options, and I didn't know how. But somehow I put distance in a way, so that was my way of making it possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And that's obviously the difficult stuff that you've been through, but it will help to then understand, you know, where you've come from to get to where you're at. And so I'd love to sort of, you know, transition the conversation to the things that you've addressed or changed or how you came out of all of that. Mm-hmm. So perhaps, was there, because one part is the eating disorder and, mm-hmm. you know, needing to sort of overcome that. The other part is the trauma and needing to sort of work on that. But even more broadly, before we sort of get into the details of those, was there a moment where something switched from that? Because you're, in a sense, you're in a bit of a sort of spiral, a downward spiral, or I don't know if downward, but things were stuck. And there was was there a moment when it sort of switched to become kind of you addressing your life and working on these things, or was it a very gradual sort of process?
I think it's been gradual. Mm-hmm. And I would say the last, I'm trying to think, maybe 12 years. Mm-hmm. When I moved overseas, so it's all the years I've been overseas, that I started making more changes. Right. And changing therapies and people. Mm-hmm. And my understanding of reading things or surrounded by different people with new different ways. Right. So I would say it was gradually, but I would also say that I think I made I wouldn't say the last, but the most recent, maybe, when I came here, because I was in another mindset, or maybe 2 years ago, I started shifting by understanding more our language and how our thoughts influence our feelings and then our behaviors, or more into trying to understand that I have a choice on my emotions, that in the past my emotions would overwhelm me, and I would allow sadness to actually almost kill me. And I think there was a shift on, no, actually an emotion, it's just coming in to tell me something, and not getting lost, like you say, in the spiral. I kind of learned again to soothe myself in different ways: meditation, therapy, writing, my walks, the things I love, and trying to feel that nothing is forever, because that's the thing when you are negative or is you feel that that's what you're gonna ever feel, and that is never ending, and you cannot see. And now I shifted into, more recently, 2 years ago or something, into the now, and into trusting the process, right, and trusting that I am something really, really small in a bigger place or universe, and other things happen, and also getting a little bit out of yourself, because when you are in all of these traumas and eating disorder, even though you don't feel you are selfish, you are in you, me, because all you can see is what's happening. And then from that place, it's very difficult to make any changes or anything. And I also encounter with very interesting, nice people who helped me to get myself out of my spiral. So that's also been a bless.
Yep. So it sounds like a big thing was kind of going from, like, emotions are just these things that kind of knock you around and affect you and sort of guide your life or lead your life, to actually being like, hang on, I can make decisions and I can choose how I react to this, or I can actually step back from these feelings and turn these little dials and knobs to kind of make it bigger or smaller, and I can find ways to not control your feelings, but kind of be in control a bit more. And to manage, that's right. And so you found ways to do that through a variety of different sort of tools. You mentioned meditation and therapy and writing, and I imagine there was maybe some activity in sport and physical activity and friends and all of those things. And so you became much more someone that was learning to deal with her inner world and shape your inner world, rather than just be kind of guided by your inner world.
Yeah, I think it was, now that I was thinking about it, like 4 years ago in one of my therapy sessions, when somehow, in the way the therapy session was going, I realized, or the therapist made me realize, that I had a choice. And up until now, I realized that my patterns, really I had been following patterns of where I was, thinking that those were my choices, but they were not.
Yeah.
They were programmed. So the moment I realized that actually I do have a choice. And that was the change, because that sentence really made me think, no, I do have a choice. I really do. And from there to also starting accepting a bit myself, I wasn't able to say I love myself or I accept myself, because it wasn't true. But by starting, a part of me do it, and then it was, yeah, a part of me does. So that felt right. And then I managed to actually bring all the parts together, I guess. But it was the choice, the realization that you have a choice always.
Yeah.
Even though in the worst moments you are, and you think we are in autopilot, but you do have a choice.
Yeah.
And look, I didn't see this 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5. So it's not easy to see, but it's what I believe now.
Yeah. And so that's really interesting that you were able to sort of start to realize that your choice in terms of, it's almost like you weren't responsible for what happened to you, but you were responsible for dealing with your life and moving your life forward, and that that part you had a choice. You couldn't change what happened, but you could change sort of the next 5, 10, 20, 40 years. And that was that kind of one of the key moments for you, when you realized that you have not freedom of choice, but an ability to choose your future or the way your life will play out.
Yeah, the sentence that everyone says about your past doesn't define your future.
Yeah.
And also, and I don't like to admit this, but I was in the victim place for many, many years, even though I didn't accept it or wouldn't have accepted, but now I see it. Because for me, a victim is like you said, I was at cause, I was thinking life was happening to me and I didn't have anything to do.
Right.
It's like, yeah, this is happening. Like every external things, I didn't have a say in or a choice.
Right.
And then at some point I realized, no, look, it's my responsibility. I can feel sad, yes. Yeah. What I do with this sadness, it's my responsibility.
Right.
It's true that sometimes it's really difficult, I'm not saying, but your responsibility maybe is go to the doctor, get a tablet or not, or therapy, or whatever you need, but you choosing, I don't want to stay here because nobody else is going to choose it for you, instead of surrender to, oh, this is me. And that's what happened to me. I thought that was me. I thought all those negative thoughts, all of that depression, sadness, blah, that was me. And I couldn't be anything else. And so that moment of taking responsibility, that also implies commitment. So sometimes it's also hard. But the moment you choose responsibility to take ownership of your life, I guess, it's also at that moment you cannot blame anyone else. Right. So that's the downside, I guess. Yeah.
It becomes almost, life becomes harder in a way because you're now responsible.
You're choosing it,
But it's interesting, that sort of concept of, I think you use the word sort of victim or victim mentality. And so could you just say how you understand that to mean, and how you were kind of in that? Because that's something that I think no matter what your trauma is, and for a lot of people, they might have at moments of their life sort of been in that sort of mentality. So that'd be interesting to hear.
So my understanding and how it impacted me, look, you can be a real victim in the sense if something happened to you when it really bad happened to you, you were a victim, yes, at that point in time when that things happen. But then from that moment on, you can stay there saying, poor me, this happened to me, and everything around there, and using it without realizing, because you are surviving, but using it as your excuse to certain behaviors or certain things that become who you are, or you think that's who you are. And it's also blaming people, even in your inner language, you would say, you've made me something. And it's like, no, how can someone make you anything? It's just being in putting the responsibility out there. It's like being a victim it's a really bad thing when something happened to you, but it's also easy to be in a mindset thinking, this is what's happening. I don't have a say and I don't do anything. That's how I understand the victim or negative mentality, that thinking, poor me, I cannot do anything about it, and this is what's happening to me, and that's it. And just letting everything else to impact you and affect you. That's how I describe what was for me.
It's like the way you deal with those bad events in your life.
Yeah.
So the fact that they happen, you might be the victim of whatever, but then if you fall into the victim mentality, it's using that as a way to stop yourself from moving forward or doing what you can do with your life. Yeah. Okay. And so you moved into that mode of being like, I can manage my emotions, or I can learn to manage my emotions. And you were starting. That must have been a slow process to gradually learn how to sort of manage all your emotions. Tell me a little bit about sort of, from the early days, what you started doing to what you have gotten kind of more sort of what you've gotten better at doing in more recent days. I'd love to understand a little bit of that journey of those managing of those feelings.
I would say that really started consciously when I moved to Australia.
Right.
Because also I started doing some studies to learn more about it, and I did some emotional intelligence things. So it was both my willingness, but also the learnings I was getting, plus the people I was choosing as friends. That was very important as well, because they would point out when I was going into my patterns of negativity or me talking in a negative way without realizing.
Right.
When something was hard for me, I would say, I cannot do it. That's it. And then I would, even at work, I would be, no, I cannot do this. And then I would block myself or stress out or things like that. And I had a friend pointing out every time I was being negative in my inner talk, which was very annoying, by the way, but it helped in the end when I really thought, okay, what can I learn from this? This person is happier than I am, obviously. So, well, if they are doing something that I don't. So initially it was still very hard, and I still had also COVID happen, right? So I still went through a lot of phases of emotions and going down. But at some point, I started changing the questions I was asking myself. So instead of, I don't know, why am I feeling like this or what's happening, which somehow makes you stay in your cycle, I would ask myself in the mornings. I had mornings that I couldn't get up from bed. I was still really sad, but I would ask me, how do you want to feel today? And I was calm. Okay, what do you need to feel calm? Well, certainly not what you're doing. So it's, okay, you need to do meditation, or you need to wake up and call a friend or smile. And I would commit to those little things. Look, I'm not saying this is easy at all. It's taken me forever. Sometimes I still get into my loop, but now I have the tools, and the moment I see me falling, automatically either I call someone to take me out. It's like, I'm getting here, I don't want to get there. So I guess it's self-awareness and acceptance, because we are not all the same, and we all have certain natural skills or personalities. So some people tend to go to negative, yes, more than other, but it's training your mind. What I found is you can train your brain to think in a different way, which I never thought it was possible.
Yeah.
And then you just do it one day, another day, small, and staying in the day. Yeah. And that's how I think it's easier, also having boundaries, because people not necessarily are going to understand, or they don't follow your pace, but as far as you are honest with yourself and with others, if you want, on where you are, I still cannot. I know people that feel sad, for instance, and they don't want to feel it. They push it down and they continue. I know if I do that, the sadness is going to come up and eat me.
Yeah.
So I know some people still don't agree with this approach. It's like, no, I'm feeling sad. Maybe I need half an hour, and I cry my eyes out.
Yeah.
And then I'm okay.
Yeah.
But if I don't feel whatever I need to feel, anger, sadness, or it's coming back stronger.
Right. The way that I would sort of think about it is it's almost like there are a whole variety of different tools that we can use to manage our emotions. So we can have like the tool of solving a problem. We can have the tool of thinking about a situation in a different way. We can have a tool of, allowing the feeling to come out or to come up. We can have the tool of, being active and doing something enjoyable, or, and the list goes on. But you've gone from not using almost any of those tools, or the tools you would use were kind of destructive tools, to actually starting to increasingly learn how to use a variety of different tools. So now, and it would depend on the situation and the feeling, right? Which tool is the best one to use? And so you've now got a wider sort of array or variety of tools that you know how to use and that you can draw on depending on the feeling and the situation you're in. Yeah. Excellent. Wow. What a huge change, right? Like that's...
Yeah, it really feels. And actually everybody around me, my friends who knows me since I'm a teenager, they can see the change. But even my friends 3 years ago, it's actually... and I feel, as I told you, lighter and better about myself. And I know I still have a journey, and I still have days up and down, and still things that I haven't totally processed. And I'm still trying to acquire new tools or new ways of things, because I also think mind and body are really linked. I don't think you can sort your mind or your trauma without including your body, either activities or whatever you need to do, or some healing or whatever is for anyone. But I don't think that only fixing your mind, if you don't combine the body, is gonna work. Well, it didn't work for me, I guess. Yeah.
And when you say fixing the body, what do you mean by that?
No, what I mean is my experience is the trauma installs in your body somehow.
Right.
So when you have the reactions, when I was having my PTSD, it was in my body. My mind wouldn't anticipate it, and suddenly I'm feeling twitchy, so I kind of move my hands and automatically, and that wasn't, and I know how trauma works. That would have been my mind feeling I'm in danger, and then bringing all the protection and the fire of and the flight, or how is it?
Flight.
Fight flight modes. But that's in your body installed somehow, and it's recalling as well. So it's not. That's what I meant. That it's not only in your mind.
Yeah.
So by moving your body, for instance, and increasing endorphins or things like that, that would help how you feel in your mind. That's what I meant.
Yeah. And one of the questions that sort of comes up in my mind as we talk about this is, where did you learn all of these skills? Because you've got a wide variety now. I'm imagining some were therapy, but even that's me kind of making assumptions. So we'd love to hear how you came, because a lot of people out there would be wondering, how can I learn to manage all of these sort of internal feelings? Where do we how do we get access to that wider variety of skills?
Well, I think these days there are a lot of places that you can go, books to read, a lot of self-help books or whatever you are interested in. There are emotional intelligence books and things. In my case, mostly it was therapy, to be fair.
Right.
Different therapies, different things. I learned different things. And then the people I started talking, and also, as I mentioned, I think 2 years ago, I started a master in coaching and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and hypnotherapy. And actually, some of those tools I learned in there as well to practice. But it was reading, therapy, conversations with people interested about this. And look, what I did is what works for me. I know people who's been years and years and years with the same therapist, for instance, which I did for years. But I got to a point when I was feeling that was not working for me anymore.
Yeah.
regardless, the therapist could be amazing, but you got to a point that you get stuck and it's not working anymore. So I would find other way and other things.
Yeah.
And the last, I guess, tools or techniques I used were very different to the very beginning. I was using traditional psychoanalysis or other type of therapies, more traditionals.
Yeah.
And these days I was doing EMDR with the eyes for the trauma, or emotional freedom technique with the tapping.
Yeah.
And that in my particular case helped me a lot with releasing and connecting my brain and my body. And depends on the day, I would use one or the other. But I guess I would say seek for help, because it's very difficult if you're really immersed into a trauma or something.
Right.
You could do as much as you can, but you still need a professional opinion or someone to help you unpack these things. That's my humble opinion. Maybe you can do it with a self-book. I certainly couldn't, but maybe you can. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, that a lot of those tools have come from therapy. And that also, I can really understand that idea of changing therapists and the benefits or the importance of that. And you do see, like I hear stories of sometimes people, they've seen the same person for 5, 10, 15 years and they're still really struggling with a problem, and they've not made a lot of, improvement. And I always just think, like, change therapists. It's not even a reflection on that person, but for whatever reason, you're not getting the change you need. And so would you sort of try a few different therapists before you found one that clicked? Or how did you know that someone was the right therapist? And how did you come to find these people that gave you those tools?
I didn't know, obviously. Well, the first probably 2, they were my parents' choice because I was a teenager. So, and look, and at that point, they helped me to an extent of realizing of the things that happened to me in the past. And then when I started developing my eating disorder, then they were sending me to more cognitive cognitive, however you say in English.
Cognitive behavior therapy. Yep.
More registers and things more tailored or targeting the eating disorder. But that didn't really work for me. So I tried. I try almost everything that I think could help. If I don't see the benefits, then I would stop. And I was trying to find, I had psychology friends who recommended me a specialist in eating disorders. So I was going through 1, 2, 3 years. It helped. And I would say, how many different, maybe I had a bunch of 10 therapists in total in my life. And all of them had helped me to come through a layer of it in different ways, because I was needing different things.
Yeah.
And actually the last one or the previous one, I got to a point where I was stuck in the trauma, and even him told me, look, I don't think the way I can help you more with this. And he was the one recommending EMDR or EFT for me. Yeah. And that's why I tried. And then the last one told me, maybe you need some somatic work in your body. So I've been very lucky also to be working, and because I'm also very self-aware or sensitive, I would know if I am talking to a therapist and at some point I feel it's a conversation and I'm not getting anything. Yeah, it's nice, but
you want to feel like you're growing from it.
Yeah. I think it's the growth is if you want to, and that's one of my, I really need to feel I'm growing or learning things. If I feel stuck, I really don't like it.
Yeah. Okay, so you've gotten a lot of benefit from psychologists, or not psychologists, therapists and different types of therapists. And that's been a huge part of that sort of transition that you've made. And that's helped you then work through both kind of all those emotions that would come up, the trauma from your past. And I imagine there's, it's an endless process, right? You never kind of get there and finish, but you've come a long way by the sounds of things, and you've found sort of, from what I understand, like a sort of a peacefulness or a peace in your life where you can sort of get up and have good days, and most days are good days, and that you're living a life that you enjoy and love. So that's part of that, the outcome or the reward for all of that work is that you're now at a place when you get up in the morning from when you get up to when you go to bed, most of that time is good. You enjoy it and you have a good life. Wow. big journey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A very big one.
Yeah.
It felt never ending.
It felt never ending, right? Yeah.
I know, I'm very tiring, and I almost gave up a few times, but I was lucky enough to, well, even having resilience and strength, and I don't give up easily, but also people supporting me, my friends or therapists, and at some point members of my family as well. So
Right.
I'm being grateful, because when you are in your mind, you are not grateful about little things, that you have a job or you have a house or something, because you take it all for granted.
Right. Yep. Yeah. One of the things that I know that you've mentioned to me outside of this podcast is around wanting to help others. And so it sounds like through that journey that you've come on, you've also kind of created or developed this desire to assist others. Tell me a little bit about that and how that fits with that journey of working on yourself.
Well, it fit in the sense that once you overcome certain things, and because during my life and this process, I've met people who was abused, who helped me, or people who had eating disorder and gave me another tools, other things. And they were like my compass as well. And I felt I wanted to be that person for other people if possible. Because sometimes when you meet someone who's gone through what you, or similar to what you're going through, and they've overcome it, or you see them happy, it's also hope and motivation, and maybe the little thing you need to feel it can be done. It's possible, even though I cannot see more or in this darkness. And I guess I've always been interested in psychology, but it didn't happen. So through my different type of therapies, and as I mentioned, what I decided to start some studies to see whether I could get more techniques for myself, but also to help others. And I think I'm more interested in, if possible, supporting teenagers or children, because I think if you start from a young age learning emotional intelligence or how you can manage things, is easier than when you learn them in your 30s. But then they are still useful. So I don't know, I'm very interested about help people to be self-aware about who they are, or how our brain kind of works, or the things we can do, small things. And I don't hold the truth or anything, so everybody would find different tools or different things that will help, and that's what I've been trying to do, and I'm contributing somehow. And at some point I may be able to have my own business with either coaching or NLP primarily is what I like, and hypnotherapy, but I don't know, I'll continue my studies probably, but it's about being able to let others know that that is possible. It's really possible. Yeah.
And it sounds like there's a part which is almost like paying back the people who have helped you, but not directly to them, but passing on that sort of service or that help that you've received. And it also sounds like there's a part of it which is almost, it's like the end result of all the work that you've done, where you've gotten to such a good place that you've got extra energy. Your time is not taken up by sort of just managing and getting through a day. And then with that extra energy, you're looking for activities or projects that you can sort of dedicate your time to. And it would make sense that one of those projects is helping others because you've got all this skill that you've gained from that journey that you've been on. And so you've got this desire to pass on that knowledge and skill to people who are maybe kind of further sort of like not as far along in that journey of these types of issues. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah.
Thank
what
you.
A nice kind of way to finish that journey is you've made your life a lot better, and now you're seeking to make the lives of others better.
Yeah. It makes me happy, I think, contributing and feeling I have something to give to others.
Yeah. And so that's something that you're just starting now.
I started slowly. I don't have a proper business yet, but I'm already doing it with where I work and with other people and pro bono, and I'm supporting charities and other people and places, and I'm planning to go on a sabbatical soon to support kids in Nepal if I can.
Amazing.
So but with the business I started slowly, and I'm trying to create content and how can I help and welcoming anyone that wants to, I don't know, to start the amazing journey of getting to know yourself better and accepting and getting a better version of yourself, I guess.
Yeah, which is what all therapy is about, isn't it? It's about improving ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's so many different approaches and types of therapies and so on.
Yeah, and I would say even if you get therapies, at the end is the part of the self-improvement, right?
Yeah.
Because someone can tell you anything, but if you really don't want to make the change or implement it or the self-improvement, then it doesn't happen. So, yeah.
That's something I've noticed is it's possible to like turn up to therapy regularly and it's like, I'm working on myself, but the real effort and the work that is required is not kind of there. And so the person kind of ticks that box and it sort of makes them feel like they're doing what they need to do. But yeah.
That's what I told you, my first 14 years in therapy. Yes, I was going and somehow it was helping, but I wasn't really embodying it or embedding or doing anything to change because somewhere deep in me, I didn't want to change. So it's important to make that, no, I want to get better. Then how? But it's also the fear, even if you are in a dark place or bad place, is the unknown place.
Yeah.
So sometimes the unknown, it's more scarier than the evil known, right? As the saying says.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what part of what change is hard, is that it can make it, you're kind of stepping into the unknown as opposed to staying with what you know. And the other thing, it's interesting, and I don't know if you've found that, but sometimes with change, it can also be quite disruptive to relationships and friendships, because if you're changing, then perhaps some of those relationships and friendships that were right for you 5, 10, 20 years ago, they're no longer right for you now. And so it can also sometimes almost make it hard to hang on to the same friends or
people.
To people, because as you change, we might connect with and have the right fit with different people.
Yeah, as you evolve. My experience is that when you're really close to people, once you change to continue the relationship, they have to change in their own ways, their own things. But the moment someone shift, like everyone else around kind of shift a little bit, even in the interactions you're having with someone. Because if you change the way you show up, then whatever way the other people is showing up at some point is not going to work. On either you drift apart or you manage to continue in different ways. But that's true. That's challenging as well.
Yeah.
But then you get new friends.
Well, it's a consequence that you may need to at times update that social circle. But as you say, other times people do shift and change, but it certainly requires a little bit of an adaptation by those around. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Caro, for coming on the show and sharing your experience. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there who would be able to take something from what you've shared. And so even by coming here, you're starting that process or continuing that process of helping people. So thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you. My pleasure.